Okay, so now we've done task 1, we can move on to task 2. Record the students who are going and whether or not they've paid. So remember what we've done in task 1 is we've estimated how many we think we're going to go. Then now, later on, we're going to record who's going and whether or not they've paid. So we need to input and store the names of the students who have asked to go on the trip, up to a maximum number allowed. Input and store whether each student has paid. Enable printouts to be produced to show students who have or not paid. So we're going to have a loop for this, obviously, because we could have up to a maximum of 45 students. Now, there's a thing here. We could, if we wanted to, loop for up to 45 or loop for the number of estimated students that we thought were going. But the thing is really what we need to do here is loop until we've added all the names. We don't need to worry about the number of students going, because if we have estimated the number of students going, that estimate might be wrong, i.e. we might have more or we might have less students who want to go. So we need to loop until the user says they don't want to enter anymore. But before we do that, before we kind of figure out the loop in that respect, let's just do our flowchart and our pseudocode. So we're going to start and we're going to set a couple of variables to start with. Because we know we're going to loop, we need to have a loop counter. So I'm just going to set a loop counter equal to 0, and then we're going to input a name, and then we're going to also input whether or not they've paid. And then we're going to add that to our variable. Actually, what we'll probably need is some arrays. We'll need one array to store who's paid and one array to store the names of people who haven't paid. So I'm going to have an array called paid, and the array is going to have the value that we've just entered, which is the name. And if they haven't paid, then we're going to add it to actually, that's let's think about this. No, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change that. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, have they paid? Is paid equal to true? Have they paid? If they have paid, then we're going to add their name to the paid array. And if they haven't paid, then we're going to add their name to the not paid array. So we can add that on there to a separate one. Okay, so I'm just going to get the labels on here. Okay, so I've added my arrows and labels on, and if they've paid, their name is added to the paid array. If they've not paid, then their name is added to the not paid array. Now, I have a counter up there, but actually thinking about this, really what we need to do is ask the user whether or not they want to loop again, as well as making sure that we don't enter more than 45 names. So we can add a counter here, and we can add our counter equals counter plus 1 to make sure that we don't go too high, and we need to have a check here to say, do we want to loop again, or is the counter greater than 45, because that's the maximum number of students going. If it is, or if it's equal to 45, sorry, then we need to end. We can't add any more. If it isn't equal to 45, then we want to ask the user whether or not to add any more names on as well, because they might just want to quit. So we can add that on. If they don't want to, if the counter isn't equal, loop again or add more names. And we'll loop again. So I'll add those arrows onto that. Okay, so I think we're there. I just need to add a couple of text fields here. That will be no, and this one will be yes here, and if they don't want to add more names, then we need to quit and end there. Good. Okay, so let's look at this and Just double check everything is right. So we're going to start off, we're going to set a counter equal to 0. We're going to input a name and input whether or not that person has paid. If they have paid, then we're going to add them to the paid name, their name to the paid array. If they haven't paid, then we're going to add them to the not paid array. So if they have paid, we're going to increase our counter by 1, or rather, either way, we're going to increase our counter by 1. And then if our counter is equal to 35, we're going to end, because you can't add more than 45 people, 45. If our counter isn't equal to 45, do we want to add more names? Yes or no? If we don't, we'll end. If we do, we'll just loop around. So I'm pretty happy with that. Yeah, let's look at what the pseudocode is going to look like for that. Okay, so the pseudocode for this, we're going to input a name. We're going to input whether or not they've paid. And if they have paid, then we're going to add their name to the paid array. And then end. If they haven't paid, actually we can get rid of that end if, we can put an else. So we can say else, add them to the not paid array. And then end. So I've just moved these over because I've not left enough space to put in the loop. So we know that we're going to have to loop. We need to basically ask the user whether or not they have anything more to enter, and we can do a while loop for that. And also we need to have a counter to make sure that we don't enter too many, more than 45. So I'm just going to create counter equals 0, and then we're going to have a while loop. So while counter is less than or equal to 45, or we could do while the counter is not equal to -1. So what we can say is, what we're basically saying is we're saying if the user enters a -1, then they want to quit. So actually we wouldn't use counter, would we? We'd use name or something like that. It's not equal to -1, like that. Okay, good. So that's basically our pseudocode for task 2. Let's get to Python coding. So we're going to add the code on here underneath task 1. We've got the estimated number, so we can have our counter equal to 0, and we're also going to have our while loop. So while counter is less than 45, or we could have a breakpoint here. So we could have a variable which is basically a boolean that is going to control our loop as well. Or loop is equal to true. Right, so we're going to input the name. Name equals input. Enter the name of the student going. And then we're going to say, have they paid? Have they paid? And then we can say Y or N, yes or no. And they're both, I'm not going to cast those to anything, they're both going to be strings. So then I say if paid is equal to yes, then we're going to add them to the paid array. And I haven't created that paid array, so I need to do that now. And that's just going to be an empty array. And not paid is going to be an empty array as well. So we can enter the name into that paid array. So if paid, actually if you just see there what I've done before I carry on, I've got two variables named the same thing. So actually I need to change the name of my paid array. I'm just going to change that to paid array, not paid array, because otherwise there's going to be a clash there. So if the variable paid, then we're going to add them to the paid array. Like that. So just to recap, we've created our arrays. One to store the names of the children who've paid, one to store the names of the children who've not paid. We've got a counter to make sure we don't add any more than 45 students. And we've got a loop controller as well in case the user wants to quit. And actually that's a good point. What we need to do is say, if you want to quit, enter the name of the student going, or we could say -1 to quit. So that's actually what we need to do first. We need to say if name is equal to -1 in quotes, then we need to quit. So we will set our loop equal to false, and we'll break as well to immediately quit out. So this will allow us to stop adding names. So if that's not the case, then we are going to check to see if they've paid. If they have paid, we're going to add them to the paid array. And if they haven't paid, then we're going to add them to the not paid array. Like that. Okay, so let's test that, see if we've left anything out. So the estimated number will say 40. Enter the name of the student going, or -1 to quit. So if I add me, I've paid. That looks okay. Then I'll add another name, Bob, and he's not paid. And then I'm going to -1. And that's not quite worked. So something's gone wrong there. So what I need to do is just double check this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put an else here, and I'm going to add that there, and that should fix that. What I'm also going to do just before I test that again is just print out my arrays, just for debug purposes. I'm going to print out my paid array, and I'm going to print out my not paid array too, and just run that and see how that works. Okay. Okay, so 45 going, and I'm going to add me. I've paid. I'm going to add Bob. He's not paid. And I'm going to enter -1 to quit. It's still asking me whether or not I've got that, and I've got some errors there as well. So, so the name error, I have spelt something wrong. I've got a big P and it should be a little p. That's that error there. What else have I got? Yeah, so it's still trying to add my names. Let's just run this, and here we go. Run module 45. There we go. So that's okay. It's still asking me whether or not they've paid, but it's not using that value. So I've paid, Bob's not paid. That's correct. Okay, good. I mean, to get rid of that error, actually, what we could do is I can check, or I could add that line here under the name. So actually, that would probably be better, actually. So if I take this here, and I'm going to add this under the name, and only ask if they have paid if we're not looping out and stopping the loop. So I can get rid of that, and then only if we're continuing, then we ask. So I'm just going to unindent all of this stuff, because otherwise we'll get an error. There we go. Okay, so just make sure you've got everything aligned as I've got aligned when you're doing this yourself. Just pause it there for a moment, make sure everything is correct. I'm going to run this again and test it. And we'll do 45 estimated going, and I'll add me, I'll add Bob, and I'll add -1, and we quit out immediately. Good. Okay, so I think there's one more thing I need to do for this, and that is make sure that every time we add something to one of the arrays, we increase our counter by 1. So let's do that. We can add this either within the if and the else down here, or just generally afterwards before we loop. So I'm going to do that there. Counter equals counter plus 1. And that will make sure that we don't add more than 45. Okay, let's move on to task 3 in the next video.